What are some fake facts that sound real? Story 1. Powdered water. I told my daughter years ago when we were driving to school about powdered water. They made it for NASA, then backpackers started using it to keep their pack light, like astronaut ice cream. Open up the package, and it absorbs the hydrogen in the atmosphere to reformulate into H2O. Ask your science teacher about it. She did. Ergo, she does not believe anything I say to this day. Story 2. Dinosaurs actually had big ears, but nobody knows that because ears don't have bones. It actually helps with the problem many bioengineers have with dinosaurs. How do you keep that much internal mass cool with that little body area? Now, on the Stegosaurus, they figured the skin over the plates on the back did the trick. The Triceratops had the big shield over its neck with skin surface area to do about the same thing. However, others had no obvious way to cool. Elephants have big ears in part to cool their bodies. This all makes it plausible and actually a worthy theory to investigate. Now we just need an artistic Redditor who can sketch us up a T-Rex with elephant-style ears. Story 3. Edgar Allan Poe once bit a man's finger off over a shot of whiskey. Why is this so believable? Edgar Allan Poe was a known alcoholic. He was always poor, but he definitely made more money than a coal miner back in his day. He was perpetually broke because of his alcohol intake. He had some of the most ridiculously high bar tabs of his time when he died. Plus, he was a tad crazy and a bit of a genius. Wacko crap tends to happen when you throw all of those things together. While he never bit a man's finger off, he did in fact get in a lot of bar brawls in his day, mostly over being cut off when he wanted to drink more. Story 4. I adore etymology and spend most of my spare time writing about it. There are all manner of false word origins that get tossed around the web, but one of the more common ones I see is that slang is short for shortened language. And while it's believable, there's no historical record to indicate that this is the case. This supposed origin also doesn't entirely make sense because slang terms aren't necessarily shorter than the terms they replace. Example, too big for one's britches replaces arrogant or cocky. On the contrary, the factors required for colloquialisms to qualify as slang are that they are informal and they are specific to a particular social group or culture. But the word's true origin, or at least the most likely one, is even more interesting in my opinion. Popularized in English during the mid-18th century, slang referred specifically to the lexicon of tramps and thieves. It is most likely Norwegian in origin, derived from the old phrase, which literally means to sling the jaw, but which carried the implication to use with words. Slang's current meaning, informal but vivid colloquial speech used as a deliberate substitute for other terms or concepts in the same vernacular, became common in the 2000s, early 19th century, growing in popularity around the same time as the word slangwanger, an American English term meaning one who uses abusive slang or a ranting partisan. Tragically, slangwanger is obsolete in our current lexicon. Story 5. You can't see your shadow in a mirror because mirrors reflect light, and a shadow is the absence of light. In fact, you see shadows a few moments later as shadows travel at the speed of light, which is slower than the speed of light. Nothing is faster than light, but darkness is always there all along, just waiting for light to come by, as demonstrated by renowned physicist Terry Pratchett. However, a mirror creates new visions into which darkness first needs to crawl into, which takes quite a while, which is where your misconception stems from. Story 6. When submitting the application for statehood, the governor of Alabama owed political favors to influential people in both the northern and southern parts of the state. So, to not anger either side, he opted to alternate where the legislature would meet. 1 month in Montgomery, the next in Birmingham. This previously unheard approach of having an itinerant group of lawmakers was summed up with his entry on the documents as mobile, since they didn't have one dedicated meeting place. But the governor was unaware of a small whistle-stop town that had used that name in their charter. Too embarrassed to admit his ignorance, that is how Mobile became the capital of Alabama. Story 7. Baskin-Robbins was actually founded by Ivan the Terrible, who got his court cook to make a cold desert for the summer. What he came up with was ice cream pronounced Baskin in Russian. Ivan enjoyed the cold treat so much that he founded the Baskin Guild. The guild eventually disbanded in 1917, but many of the old members moved to America to form a Neo-Baskin Guild. With famous businessman Robin Oldcastle, they formed the world-renowned company, Baskin Robbins. Story 8. Pokemon was originally going to only have 12 different types, going with the number as it was divisible by 2, 3, and 4, which allows for some convenient and interesting ways to look at the different types, with 3 more types being added later for balancing reasons and even more in later games. The most notable remnant of this early design is how Charizard and Rayquaza are flying types instead of dragons types, all because they were designed before they decided to make dragon types a thing. It is also why Dragon and Ghost only had a single evolution line for each of them, significantly less than the other types in representation. Story 9. Prior to his involvement in the Battle of Trafalgar, Horatio Lord Nelson was also involved in a brief conflict known as the Great Antarctic War. England, via its control of Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, had made claims to the possession of Antarctica that were contested by Spain via its control of Argentina and Chile. Despite its claim of being a Great War, it amounted to little more than 2 skirmishes off the coast of the Falkland Islands and a brief landing near what today is known as McMurdo Bay. Story 10. One of my favorite things to do when I used to teach anatomy and physiology was to throw in a random fact and see if any of my students would call it crap. Throughout the semester, they got pretty good, but my favorite one I said that they all believe was, did you know that when they take a kidney from a healthy donor, they always take the left one? Not at all true. I told them afterwards it was a lie, but it was always fun and kept them on their toes. Story 11. Rapping was originally inspired by the sound of a woodpecker tapping on wood. During the Ice Age, humans rode around in woolly pouches of skin on top of woolly mammoths. Sometimes a human would forget where he was and fall down, getting crushed underfoot by the mammoth, which is where the saying, "Don't fall asleep inside of a woolly mammoth's pouch," came from. The first known use of fire in human history was a prehistoric human trying to burn criminal evidence. Story 12. Okay, where do I begin? Disclaimer though, these might sound a bit too unbelievable to qualify for the post and would enter too much conspiracy territory than fake fact territory. I apologize for that, but oh well, here we go. Project Manhattan was not just a project, but actually a full-scale wing of the American Army based in the Manhattan and New York area, dedicated to crafting and testing previously thought to be impossible projects and technologies. However, it was disbanded right after the creation of nuclear weaponry, as the US government was afraid of the implications, and they were in doubt of the funding being used for morally correct projects, that is, avoiding extreme genetic testing like the Germans. World War II was a planned war initiated by the Germans to cull the population and leave only their preferred race. However, the first phase of the plan failed, leaving the rest of the plan in jeopardy and initiating the rest of the war. Their plan went out of hand and ended up being the death blow to the Third Reich. Story 13. We went through a period of time in my family where we ate a lot of Panda Express. So I told my youngest brother, 12 at the time, that Panda Express uses panda meat for all of their meals, which is a big ethical problem. For school, they had to write a persuasive essay, and he chose to persuade everyone that Panda Express should be stopped. The best part, however, was that the teacher asked if there were any volunteers that wanted to read their paper in front of the class. Of course, he raises his hand and the entire class loses it, including the teacher, who promptly gave him an F and made him rewrite it. Story 14. One of the first British monarchs was a bit eccentric. He had a pet mouse that he took everywhere with him. He had his tailor sew a pocket onto all of his shirts for the mouse to ride in. He spoke in the plural, us, we, etc., for himself and the mouse. Since he was royalty, no one would correct him, but other royals made fun of him behind his back by also using the plural tense. Eventually, That became seen as the way for royalty to speak, and is why the royal we exists. That is why, to this day, if you incorrectly use us or we, someone may ask if you have a mouse in your pocket. Story 15. You should drink 8 glasses of water per day. Depending on how much you weigh and your age is my guess, also what's considered a glass of water varies depending on how big said glass or cup is. But I'd say 5 medium-sized ones is good, or more precisely, 40 fluid ounces of water each day. Again, this is entirely guessing and what works for me. No doctor or specialist, I didn't even do any research before writing this comment. If you're fat, you need more water to support a larger body, so try to aim for more. If you're raising a baby, you don't need to give them a full 40 fluid ounce, since the volume of that is bigger than newborns. Or if you're stupidly skinny, you can make do with less. If you're into some kind of piss fetish, you'll need 100 plus fluid ounce, or however much you can experience before water intoxication or being overhydrated kicks in, a day. Story 16. The common seahorse is, of course, not a mammal, but did you know it's not even a fish? It's actually a colony of mutually dependent but individual cells clustered together. These are called zoolanoids. And the creepy thing is, each seahorse reproduces by splitting off some cells to form a new seahorse. Why is that creepy? Because we don't know where the original one is and what it wants. I'm guessing you already know it, but siphonophores are organisms that appear to be singular, but are actually colonial and made out of smaller animals called zooids. The Portuguese man-o'-war is a famous example that many mistake to be a jellyfish. However, the giant siphonophore, Priadubia, is my favorite because of how it glows. Also because I learned all of this in the video game Endless Ocean Blue World 2. Story 17. That whole soy thing, the estrogen in soy, is not compatible with the human body. It doesn't do anything. Even if it did affect your body, you could eat nothing but soy your entire life, and it would barely have any effect. I'm not some expert on the human body, but I do know that you don't process hormones the same way you do something like protein. Your body's not built to take it in. If it did, it'd be my entire diet. You need pills or shots, things specifically made to do this crap. Food is not going to affect your hormones, no matter how fancy you word the makeup of soy. Story 18. The Big Star song In the Street, later known as the That 70s Show theme song, was written by Alex Chilton about his being brought up by parents that would abandon him for months. He'd be left alone sometimes days on end, with only his friends to keep him company, while he would take care of his siblings. The same old thing we did last week was based on him sometimes eating the same meal the entire week, because they didn't have any other food in the house. Story 19. The personality differences between dogs and cats are completely environmental. Domesticated dogs and cats behave the way they do because of the expectations their human owners put on them. If you raised a cat like you raised a dog, you would get a cat that acts like a dog. But that is almost impossible to do because almost every person has unconscious biases about how animals should behave. Try as hard as you like, your biases will always turn a cat into a cat and a dog into a dog. The only reason we know this is based on sociological experiments. Parsons et al., July 1911, James and Pearson, December 1923, where dogs and cats were introduced to isolated Polynesian communities. But no care or behavior instructions were provided. The papers are a really interesting read. Unfortunately, such experiments can no longer be repeated because there are no longer any societies that don't know about dogs and cats. Story 20. A lot of folks misunderstand the significance of the meteor impact in wiping out the dinosaurs. Most people believe the old theory that the meteor caused a climate shift that tanked the Earth's biosphere. While that did happen to some degree, it doesn't explain why more dinosaurs didn't evolve after. Why did land creatures suddenly get so much smaller after the climate recovered? The answer is gravity. The asteroid that struck Earth was large enough that it deposited a large amount of mass onto the planet, which resulted in a 1.3% increase in Earth's gravitational pull. While it doesn't sound like much, small changes can have big effects. And in this case, it meant dinosaur-sized creatures could no longer easily support their own weight. skeletons had to get larger, which slowed them down and added even more weight, and so on and so forth. As a result, natural selection started favoring smaller, more nimble forms, leading to the size scale of most modern animals. That's why today, big animals are either slow and plodding, elephants, or have incredibly fragile skeletons, horses. Story 21. When I first came to Canada, I knew the boring old drop bear spruik wasn't good enough. Enter spontaneously combusting koalas. Me, variously sloshed in a bar, sees how far you can get without someone questioning me, which goes like this. Oh yeah, chlamydia is pretty bad these days, but global warming is having unexpected consequences. You see, koalas only eat eucalyptus leaves, which are highly flammable, but their arms are too stubby to groom themselves. At the height of summer, when temperatures soar to 45 degrees off in litter, broken glass, ECT, can reflect and cause their oil-covered fur to ignite, absolutely devastating the Queensland populations. I was rarely questioned and asked if they could donate. Story 22. Believe it or not, the ancient Asian and European myths of dragons were based off of the bones from dinosaurs. These myths dated as far back as 15,000 years ago, and they didn't actually know what dinosaurs were. So the first sense of logic was, hey, I found this big bone, probably a fire-breathing lizard. And since nobody could prove them wrong, people just rolled with it. The myths eventually spread of dragons and actually evolved to why we think dinosaurs were more scaly and less feathery to begin with. People back then even thought dragons had wings based on the small arm bones of a T-Rex and just thought it was a wyvern. Story 23. Cracker Jack was originally the title of a newspaper comic that was popular after World War I about a boy and his dog that went on adventures. The dog would attack bad guys when the kid blew a special whistle, and the publishers had a promotion where you could send away for a little tin whistle like the kid used. Originally, they sent the whistles in envelopes, but they got angry letters saying that the whistles had gotten crushed in the mail. So they started sending them in little boxes filled with popcorn because it was the cheapest packing material available at the time, because prohibition had led to corn surpluses. So, after a couple weeks, the publishers started getting letters saying thank you for the whistle. But the popcorn tasted terrible, so they started coating the popcorn in molasses, also cheap because of prohibition, to keep the popcorn from going stale. Eventually, the comics stopped being published, but the toy whistles packed in molasses-coated popcorn stayed popular. Eventually, the whistle changed to various other toys, since people really only wanted the Cracker Jack snack anyway. Peanuts weren't added until the 60s, which is why Take Me Out to the Ball Game says Peanuts and Cracker Jack. Story 24. If you type your PIN key at an ATM backwards, it will work, but also alarm the police. You can use this in case you're being forced to withdraw money. I saw this in a chain email a couple of years ago. My own mother forwarded it to me. Her PIN code is symmetrical, meaning it's the same forward as backward. I had fun telling her that. I've been corrected. Such a PIN is not called symmetrical, but palindromic. I'm pretty sure everyone understood what I meant, but there you go. And yes, you can now narrow down the PIN of my mother, down to less than 100 possible combinations. Good job! Story 25. Carrots improve your eyesight. World War II propaganda by the British. Britain self-imposed blackouts at night, so German bombers would have difficulty finding targets. The British Air Force were able to locate and shoot down these bombers because of a secret system of radars. Not wanting the Germans to find out about it, they spread the propaganda that one of their famous pilots loved eating carrots. British people then began to eat carrots because of the blackouts, thinking it would help them see better. Story 26. You lose most of your body heat through your head. It's often said that you lose somewhere around 98% of your body heat through your head, which is why you have to wear a hat in the cold. Except that you don't. It has been reported that the amount of heat released by any part of the body depends mostly on the surface area. On a cold day, you would lose more heat through an exposed leg or arm than a bare head. Story 27. Vaccines cause autism. Alternative medicine is effective. GMOs and gluten are terrible for you, you can and should go on juice cleanses to detox your body. Watson and Crick discovered DNA with no help from anybody else. The Pilgrims came to America to establish total religious freedom and landed on Plymouth Rock. America gained independence on July 4th, 1776. Einstein failed math and challenged an atheist professor, and freedom of speech protects you from any consequences of what you say. Story 28. The word typo comes from an unfortunate event in a hospital in the 1940s. A patient came in and needed a blood transfusion of type B blood. The label on the bag was misprinted, however, so it said type B, but it actually was type O. The patient unfortunately died, and the story made some local headlines. Among the hospital staff, they started calling misspelled words typos as a bit of morbid humor. Over time, the word got into the public as typo. This story is also interesting because the patient's family ended up suing the hospital for its error for a huge sum of $50,000. Due to some dodgy legal loopholes, however, the family was only able to collect tree fitty. Story 29. Toast got its name from the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar. During a speech, he was due to make a toast, commending one of his lieutenants, Alexis Panem, on his latest conquest. Panem is Latin for bread. However, he had learned of Panem and bread's cowardice during said conquest from the troops, with whom Caesar would regularly spend time with. His toast, in front of all the dignitaries of Rome, was more of a roast in which he utterly ashamed Panem. He was cast into exile. It then became a popular saying amongst those present that if you burned bread, you toasted it. Story 30. When the College of Cardinals convenes in Vatican City to elect a new pope, onlookers outside the conclave know when each successive vote is taken because they see smoke rising from the chimney immediately afterwards. White smoke when there's a new pope. Black smoke when the vote doesn't have a clear winner. A 2/3 majority is required. The white smoke comes from them burning their ballots. The black smoke comes from them burning their ballots plus a part of the old pope, which helps encourage the cardinals to reach a decision as the number of remaining parts dwindles.